Tough questions. Oh my God. So let me begin. What are the landmarks and stages in jap practice for sadhaka? Could you please share any references, books that discuss this in detail? I'm really sorry, I'm not aware of any books. I'm sure there are books, but I'm not in a position to make any recommendations other than, of course, Swami Brahmanandaji's The Eternal Companion is a book that I have found very helpful. There is another book called Toward the Goal Supreme by Swami Virajanandaji, some very helpful tips. And of course, there is this one big book called Meditation and Spiritual Life by Swami Yatishwaranandaji. These are some of the books that go into some detail about these practices, and the tips given in that one can be very helpful. Can different mantras from different traditions be practiced on the same japamala? Probably not. I mean, from what I have heard and come to believe, it is best that the japamala that is used is best used for the mantra received from one's own guru. And so my recommendation would be to not use the mala for different mantras. And at some point we may also have to question the need for many different mantras. I can understand if you have different illnesses, we'll need different kinds of medicines. But really, there's only one major illness in spiritual life, and it's called bhavaroga. And that illness, the only one medicine, the mantra that we have received from our teacher, is enough to cure that disease. So I'm not very sure whether we need too many mantras for it. Also, it's a little bit like don't we feel that the mantra that I have received is sufficient or enough, or it needs to be just like you get a vaccine and they need a booster or something. So it's like my mantra needs some boosting by using some complementary mantras. I'm not sure about that. My belief has all along been that the Siddha mantra, as it is called, that received from one's own guru, is enough to do whatever the mantra is supposed to do. What does naritasana really mean? How can we practice it? For example, if we read that we are that transcendent and immanent reality, how can we meditate on that? Now, this is a big subject, and there are meditation techniques, there are personal meditations, impersonal meditation, so that's a big subject to discuss. But nididhyasana is different from doing japa, for instance. It's different from, like most of us do, an Ishta mantra, and that's a kind of an indirect way to practice nididhyasana. But when we simply use the word nididhyasana, it usually really technically means it's a deep exploration of one's own self. We read about Swamiji's wandering days. We also read about how monks wander from place to place. I mean, of course, nowadays there's a class of monks which stay put in one place in a hermitage, but a large number of monks go from place to place. What is helpful to remember is that external wandering is not the only way to understand monastic life. The external wandering is only an external manifestation of really the inner wandering. And one way to understand what inner wandering means is let me put it this way. How long can we do self-effort? And really, by the self-effort, the self here is really our present sense of I. It's not the Atman there. Atman doesn't need to make any effort. So self-effort means the effort I make. Now, in order to do self-effort, we need the ego, the sense of agency to do something. So as long as the ego is present, we are able to do self-effort. The purpose of self-effort is to I don't want to sound too esoteric, but to kind of awaken our own inner being, the inner self. So sometimes in Vedanta, it's not just, you sit in meditation, your ego goes and we become nirvikalpa samadhi. That might could occur then. But oftentimes what the gradual way it normally occurs is to first realize, not just, let me put it this way. I spoke earlier yesterday and this morning about the body, mind, and the self. And right now, in our consciousness, all the three have gotten mixed up. So, an early experience, spiritual experience, is to experience one's separation from one's own body and mind. That's different from realization Brahman. It's not Brahmajnana. But to know that I am not the body, I am not the mind. Now the ego is a function of the mind. We can do self-effort only as long as we are identified with the mind. But once we have this first step, we might almost say the realization of a jiva, that I am a jiva, means the inner self, which is distinct from the body and mind, which is still identified with the body and mind, but distinct from it. So to realize one's inner self, to realize one's separation from the body and mind, up to that point, we can do self-effort. Once we know we are distinct from the body and the mind, distinct from the body is rather easy somewhat to know. But to know that we are distinct from the mind is a fairly advanced stage of progress. But once we separate ourselves from that, then the ego is gone. And then there is no more self-effort to be done. Beyond that point, all that we can do is to then just keep ourselves facing in the direction of the Supreme Being. So the inner being, the Jivatma, all that the Jivatma can then do is go in search of that Paramatma. And that's that inner wandering that is spoken of. In fact, the purpose of Gayatri is the Tanno Hamsaf Prachodayat, the Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat, that Dhi. The Dhi is really that inner awakened self. And so, when that is awakened, then no more self-effort is possible beyond that. And beyond that, the inner wandering is the Jivatma going in search of the Paramatma. And so that is really what nididhyasana really means. Just keeping the Jivatma facing in the direction of the Paramatma. Sometimes they speak about, I'm not an expert in rowing and all that, but sometimes when you are going in, a breeze itself will take you. All that you need to do for navigation is hold your, what do you call that thing which directs the rudder? Yeah, just hold the rudder in the right direction, because you no longer need to do any effort. The breeze, and that's Sri Ramakrishna spoke about. So we'll just need to hold the rudder, and then that breeze will take us. So nididhyasana is related to that. That first to just awaken that inner self and hold the rudder right. And that's why sometimes translated as the deep exploration. The inner exploration is similar to this inner wandering that I spoke about.
One very good book on japa is Seeing God Everywhere.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, a good book for japa and mantra is a book called Seeing God Everywhere by Swami Shraddhananda ji. I think that's really a good book. In fact, several essays in that book was first published in the Vedanta Kesari, and I was the editor, and it just slipped my memory. Please read that, because there are a lot of things in that book you will not find in any other book, because they are not simply from textual sources, but they are based on the Swami's own personal realizations. And he was among the Swamis in our order, was considered a Japasiddha. So that would be a very good book if you want to take a deeper study about mantra. Next question. What is your prescription to become a bad actor? One way to become a bad actor, and this was the reference to what we spoke about earlier, is to try to never forget one's own true identity. In the beginning, it still can remain an intellectual process. We read in the books and the teachings of the elders that we are the Atman, that we are infinite, pure, we are divine. And we should find creative ways to try to remember that as often as we can. And that way, we will become really bad actors. We won't, sometimes people are afraid that, if I try to always remember I'm divine, then I won't appear normal to others. Yes, and in some ways it might be true. It is not as bad as one sometimes imagines, but yes, my life will definitely change. But if I'm too much worried about what other people think about me, then I don't think we might make enough progress in spiritual life. There is that story about a yogi who wanted to meditate, so aspiring to be a yogi. So he wanted to say, I just want to meditate. But no matter wherever he went, he found this noise and people disturbing and a lot of distractions. So he wanted to know, I just want to just be by myself in complete solitude. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to meet anyone. But because he was a good person, a holy person, people still wanted to go and spend time with him. Well, everyone wants holy company. So because he wanted solitude, then he goes to another great saint and says, I want full solitude. I don't want anybody to come and disturb me because I want to realize the Supreme. And the teacher said, okay, so you want to be in solitude. You don't want anyone to disturb you. I'll tell you one method. I'll take you to this one cave and you can be there, and I will put some bones outside that cave and spread the word that you are a cannibal. You eat people who go there. And if anybody tries to come near that cave, you just come out and start throwing stones at them. And this person is horrified. He said, I can't do that. People will think I'm insane. And then this saint said, oh, so you are worried about what people will think about you. Then he said, then you have to deal with it, deal with all the distractions. Now that's an extreme case, but this is something that we really have to keep in mind, that if we really want to go deep into spirituality and yet continue to remain exactly as we are now, that's not going to happen. Our life will change. And it'll change for the better, but because we are changing as we are spiritually developing, it's possible that some people who were quite happy and comfortable with our old persona may no longer find us interesting. If all that you're going to talk about is spirituality, and if your friends are not interested in it at all, and you are not interested in the things they are interested in, then sometimes it's possible that you might lose a few friends, but you might gain other friends. So life will change. And if we don't want our life to change at all, then it's rather tough, I think. So becoming a bad actor has a price to pay. Is there a way to clear the junk or bad impressions already collected by the mind, or is that done by replacing it with good ones? No, we cannot really replace old samskaras with new ones. I mean, to mention it very briefly, every action we do, every thought we think, leaves an impression in the mind. That's the samskara. And every samskara has a tendency to generate a desire corresponding to it. So if I have drunk coffee for the first time in my life, it will leave a coffee samskara in my mind. And if I have enjoyed that first cup of coffee, next time I pass by Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, that external object or a memory of that first thing can activate this samskara, comes in a form of a desire in the heart. It's a little bit like if you're boiling water in a jar. After some time, you will see bubbles will start coming from the bottom of the jar and coming up and bursting on the surface. Samskaras are a little bit like that. They are all in this unconscious part of the mind, but they get activated either by past memory or an external stimulant, and then they come up like a bubble in the conscious part of the mind. Only when they come in the conscious part of the mind, we become aware of them. And so that is vasana, that is desire. Now, desire by itself is not problematic because as long as there are samskaras, there will be desires. The will looks at those desires, and whichever desire the will grabs onto, holds onto, then that becomes an intention or sankalpa. And that sankalpa then gets transformed into action or karma. So desire plus intention becomes intention, it's a little bit like right now, maybe some of you or one of you or two of you, suddenly this coffee samskara in your heart comes up. And you say, oh, it would be great to have a cup of coffee. But then you also think, well, right now we are right here in the middle of this question and answer session. This is not a good time to go and have a cup of coffee. So even though the desire comes, your will says, no, this is not the right time. So you don't grab that desire, it's not converted into an intention, and you don't get up and get yourself a cup of coffee. And then that desire kind of goes back and stays there. So the samskaras, in other words, can't be removed and thrown away. All we can do in the beginning is to weaken them. So just as we have samskaras which are debilitating, which can weaken us, we also have samskaras which are strengthening. For instance, if you do some lot of exercise or jogging, then there is jogging samskara. And every time the jogging samskara comes up, let me go on for a run or a good walk, and we can convert it into an intention and action and do some more exercise, and it will make us stronger. So we have both strong as well as weak samskaras in the mind. The will, and that's the important role the will plays. The will has to be vigilant that when a desire springs in the heart, to know to which desire I should say yes and to which desire I should say no. If we do that well, we can make tremendous amount of progress. And so, one other thing, every time I say yes to a desire, I make it stronger. Every time I say no to a desire, I make it weaker. So if any weakening, self-destructive desires come in the heart, and if I keep saying no, 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 no to them, those samskaras don't disappear, but they become extremely weak. And the more weak they become, the less easy it is for them to generate more desires. And then, especially in Raj Yoga, there is a lot of discussion about then what to do. After weakening the samskaras, then it's all again very symbolical language. They say you have to burn those desires. And you burn them and then you destroy them. So sometimes they speak about drying them. You remember in Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, he said that a wet matchstick can't be lit. And so you kind of dry it and then only the fire can come. There is a ritual in the daily puja called Bhuta Shuddhi. And that is also connected with this. How we can dry up. And it's done ritually. And so the Vayu Bija is, and then there is the Agni Bija. You first dry it, then you burn it, and then you recreate a new inner body. That's why Bhuta Shuddhi it's called. So the idea is simply this, that we need to weaken the samskaras in the mind, and then in the language of bhakti, they say it's the grace of God then that completely removes the samskaras. Sometimes we speak about reducing all karma to ashes. Again, a different way, but the idea is the same, that either through grace of God or through the burning power of knowledge, as the Gita says, knowledge reduces all of these things back to ashes. So depending on the different language that is used, either the power of knowledge, of grace of God, and so on, these samskaras can be ultimately be destroyed. But in the beginning, right now, we don't have to worry so much about destroying the samskaras. It's more about weakening them, saying yes to the right desires and saying no to the wrong desires. How to feed, nourish the spirit of renunciation that comes in moments while not neglecting duties to family, job. Sometimes we, I think, make a mistake, and partly because of the way the things gets framed, that thinking that our duty to family and duty to the job comes in the way of practicing renunciation. I don't think so. They are not mutually opposed to each other. Although popularly, renunciation gets identified with, if you kind of renounce everything, go and become a monastic, or just lead a solitary life, then you have renounced. I don't think so. Renunciation is primarily an inner process. It's renouncing or giving up one's attachment to one's own ego. So the more I distance myself from my own ego, I'm renouncing. It's an inner thing. It has nothing to do whether you are with your family or you are in a forest. And therefore, we don't often recognize, we don't often appreciate how much renunciation is already being practiced in the family setting. Parents know, but they probably don't see it as renunciation, but there is so much scope for sacrifice. When there is a baby in the family, a baby is born in the family, parents sacrifice their sleep, They sacrifice their own needs in order to take care of the young one. In a family setting, there is an opportunity so often to sacrifice one's own interests for others. So, to recognize that renunciation is possible no matter where we are, no matter what the nature of duty is. And renunciation is primarily a state of the mind. It's not about where we are living or what kind of duties or responsibilities we have. I think that would be helpful to remember. There is, yes, in our books, there is this glorification of the monastic ideal, sometimes to the detriment of feeling that somehow being a family person is like the second best thing we could do. But that's not how things are. Even if you have read it, I would encourage you to read that talk in Swamiji's Karma Yoga. And he says, each is great in its own place. So, not to think that one is superior to the other, but that even though the nature of our duties and responsibilities might be different, it is possible to practice renunciation, sacrifice, selflessness anywhere we are, if we are the right ideals in the mind. The way the divine presence shows itself in form, what determines that? And how does that Ishta take one to God? I'm not sure whether I've understood the question fully. Probably it's about in form, the sakara, when we have as our Ishta the divine who has a certain form, a certain name, and how would that take us to that transcendent being? One way to understand that is the way to meditate on the divine, seeing the divine as with form and with name is an easier approach, a more natural way, partly because we already know how to deal with forms. In fact, both when we are awake and in a dream state, we are already dealing with forms. So the mind is accustomed to dealing with forms, the mind is accustomed to dealing with sound. And so what our japa and meditation does is, it says, you know how to deal with sound, but while we deal with different kinds of sounds throughout the day, while meditating, all that we are expected to do is just hold on to one sound, the sound of the mantra. While we are accustomed to dealing with different kinds of forms, while meditating, the teacher says, now just hold on to one form, the form of your chosen deity. So, the ability that we already have to deal with sound and form, all that we are asked to do is, instead of flitting from one sound to another, one form to another, try to spend some time with just one sound and one form. That is the sound of the mantra and the form of one's Ishta, the chosen deity. That's first part. And when we have gathered enough strength, the enough ability of the mind to hold on to that one sound, to that one form, then we'll soon recognize that the form of the Ishta, while it is a form, it is special in some way than all other perishable forms in the world. The sound of the mantra, while it is just a sound, it is a special sound different from other sounds. In what way is it different? That when the mind is ready to leap beyond form, it's the form of the Ishta then that melts on its own into the formless. It's the sound, the name of the Ishta, which is embedded in the mantra. The name itself melts and takes us to the nameless. It's like, I don't know the technical terms, but some of the surgeries when we have, and I know there are a few surgeons amongst you here, so there are certain sutures, you call them, or to tie up the after the things are cut inside. So some of the sutures were used are what do you call it to? What do you use it to needle through? Vinod, what do we call it? Yes, I was thinking about in certain surgeries, afterwards, after the healing occurs, it just degrades by itself. Yeah, so you don't have to again go to the surgeon to have the thing cut, right? What is there any specific name for that?
Just absorbable switches. It absorbs by itself.
Absorbed, yeah. So that kind of a thing. So that's how it happens for the form of the Ishta and the name of the Ishta. That when we are ready for it, the form kind of melts, is absorbed as it were into the formless. The sound, the name is absorbed as it were into the nameless. And so we don't have to do anything. We don't have to worry about, oh, when am I going to transcend it? We don't have to worry about it. Just have faith in the words of your teacher. Hold on to the form of Ishta. Hold on to the sound of your mantra. And that itself then, the journey is always from the form to the formless, the name to the nameless, from sound to beyond sound. One small footnote to that. When expressed this way, we sometimes may think that the formless is somehow higher than the form. That's not the intention here. By formless, what I really mean is that beyond even the distinction between the form and the formlessness. So do not think, as some people do, that somehow non-duality is higher than duality. Oh, sorry. Yes. The people who have this attraction to a non-dual ideal, they somehow think that Advaita is higher than Dvaita, or formless is higher than form. I think that's a very stupid way to think. Nothing, there is no higher or lower here. It's just different. The higher, if at all we want to speak about higher, then it's not that non-dual is higher than dual. What is higher would be even go beyond even the notion or the distinction between duality and non-duality. That's higher. And that's why when someone asked Sri Ramakrishna, God is with form or without form? Sri Ramakrishna says, God can be with form, God can be without form, and so much more besides. I think that last phrase is very significant. Sri Ramakrishna did not simply end up by saying, well, God can be form and formless. No, form and formless and so much more besides. The idea is not to go into this kind of a binary distinction, form and formless, or personal and impersonal. No, the supreme, if at all, or the absolute would be to go even beyond this distinction between personal and impersonal. It's not to think that impersonal is somehow higher than personal. So this higher and lower, it doesn't really work. And someone said that a dualist with spiritual experience is better than a non-dualist with no experience. And so we can go on talking endlessly about non-duality and consciousness, and that's wonderful. It can be extremely intellectually stimulating. But another so-called dualist who has had a vision of the Holy Mother or Thakur or Krishna or Rama, that person is more spiritually advanced than someone else who is just talking about non-duality. So we have to be very careful in not creating these higher, lower distinctions in our minds. Is there any remedy to develop concentration while we do the japa? Though I try myself to have control over mind as much as possible, but can't do it even for a minute. Yes, that is a good question, because concentration, Swami Vivekananda said that concentration is the key to all knowledge. So the mind has to be focused, has to be concentrated in order to have a knowledge, a deeper insight. One of the ways, there are clearly many ways to do it, but at least one way would be to recognize the importance of what we are doing, or to recognize the harm that can come by not doing it. But think about it this way, that if you're forced to, like you are crossing a small tiny little bridge over a valley, and it's night, and you don't have any option, you have to cross it to go to the other side. And you're right in the middle of the bridge, and suddenly the moon goes behind the clouds, and it's dark. And you can't just be standing there, you have to walk. You know that one misstep, one wrong step, you're just going to fall down. At that moment, concentration is not a problem. It's not a problem because you know your very life depends upon it. Do we really feel that when we try to do japa or meditation? If we feel that, concentration wouldn't be a problem. But what we do find is, well, I can just sit mechanically, repeat the mantra 108 times with my mind going elsewhere, and nothing happens to me. Life is just fine. And so it's difficult to get concentration. But if I can convince myself that even a moment that is lost, I'm hurting myself. And there is this sutra in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It says, what is that? Pratipaksha bhavanam? What's the first word? Vitarka badhane. Vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavanam. It can be interpreted in two different ways, but one way would be to, if I know that something is going to hurt me, if I don't do it well, then I'll be very careful about doing it. Or if I know that something is going to hurt me, then I wouldn't want to do it. So one helpful way would be to convince oneself that how important meditation is. Now, many of us today have become conscious about food, that we know that we want to eat healthy foods because we know how related it is to our health. And so we are very careful about what we eat. Well, most of us, not everyone. We are careful about what we eat and what we don't eat. Sometimes less careful, but we are also now become more aware of what I should read, what I shouldn't read, what kind of images I should allow my mind to get in, because some wrong thoughts, wrong ideas can mess up my mind. So we become aware of that. So the more aware we become, the more careful we become. So a similar kind of an awareness, if I can bring to myself about the vitally important practice of meditation, that if I meditate well, what is the good it can do for me? And if I don't do it properly, if I do it carelessly, if I don't take it seriously, how much harm it can do to me. If I can convince myself of that, I think concentration might be a little easier, a little better. And that's why you might remember that passage in the Kathopanishad says, Kshurasya dhara nishita duratyaya. The spiritual path is often considered to the razor's edge, like almost on walking on the sword. If we remember the seriousness of this, not think of our daily prayer, worship, meditation as an optional activity, that it is something as important or probably more important than the other things that we do in life, then concentration might be a little bit more easy. But having said that, ultimately, it's just about practice. Whether or not we are able to concentrate, just do it. And the power of the mantra, our faith in the words of the Guru and the scriptures will help us definitely in strengthening our practice. You said that one should always sit with the belief that realization can come now. However, I'm not able to truly believe it, knowing that I have so many flaws in me and I'm nowhere close to having the fourfold qualification. There is an incident that Swami Yatishwarananda ji narrates in his life. He was one of the truly outstanding monks of our order, a truly realized soul. So when he was a young monk, well, he still hadn't had sannyas then and was anxious to receive that blessing of the sannyas ordination from Swami Brahmananda ji. So he says that he went to Raja Maharaj, as he was called, and said, Maharaj, if you think I'm fit for sannyasa, could you please give me the sannyasa? And he said, Brahmanji looked at him, smiled and says, my child, no one is fit for sannyasa, but I'll give you. So the idea is not really to become perfect. Well, eventually, yes. But to think that one day I'm going to do all these 4 qualifications perfectly, and then I will have this faith that I will realize now, I don't think that that's the best way to go about it. All that we need to do is complete sincerity. That yes, with whatever knowledge, skill, energy, talent has come to me through God's grace, I'm going to use it as best I can to acquire the quality necessary for my enlightenment. And the effort I put in may not be enough, but my sincerity is full. My sincerity is 100%. When that happens, eventually, it's God's grace that takes us across that bridge. The example that is sometimes given is that when a little child is who has been crawling on all fours and is trying to walk, trying to hold on to something and all of you who have had children and grandchildren at home have seen sometimes the struggles. We may not remember our own struggles when we were babies, but when we look at other babies trying to do that, it's easy to imagine what we must have done when we were babies also. The image that is often presented is that a mother would sometimes just see the baby trying on her own. And even if the baby may fall down 1 or 2 times, so long as it's not a serious fall, the mother would be nearby, encouraging the baby to try on her own. And when it's the right time, then the mother holds the baby's hand and says, come, I'll show you how to do it. That's the image I truly hold to my heart, and I really love it, because all of our efforts in spiritual life are little like the baby trying to get up and trying to walk. And the Holy Mother is just standing by. We are maybe not able to see her, but she can see us. But have the faith that Mother is by my side. And all that I need to do is to try my best. No matter how often I fail, how often I fall, I must get up. And then when mother sees that here is my child, here is my baby who is not giving up, who is earnest, who wants to achieve, then the mother puts her hand out and says, okay. And because often we are not able to see that happening, we just say, it happened through God's grace. It's really Holy Mother holding us by the hand and taking us across. And if we can see that, we are truly blessed. Even if we don't see it, we know it's the working of divine grace. Next, what is mantra nyasa? How does one place or direct the mantra to various places such as mind, prana, an external world? I think the book that I referred to before, Seeing God Everywhere, you will find a lot of answers to the questions related to mantra and nyasa and so on. So I'm not an expert in this field, so I would recommend that you please read that book. Next, how to balance, harmonize and synthesize the apparently opposite paths of jnana and bhakti. How to distinguish between shraddha and blind faith. Yeah, too much is made in our books sometimes, I think. These differences between jnana and bhakti. Yeah, sure, they are different, they are not identical. But it doesn't really matter. Why? It's like this. People are different. I mentioned earlier this morning, I think, that the mind has different powers or different functions. There is sometimes the power of emotions and feelings, that is sometimes called the affective functions of the mind. The ability to use our logic and reasoning, that's the cognitive function of the mind. And then the willpower that is used, that is sometimes called the cognitive function of the mind. Now, there are people in whom all of these three powers or three ways of dealing with the world are developed equally. But in many of us, one or the other is more dominant. And so that's why then we speak about some people, this person is very emotional, or this person is very rational. We kind of put these labels depending on whichever of these tendencies of the mind is dominant in that person. So depending on whichever is the dominant characteristic of our mind, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of doing will resonate more than certain other ways. That's why, although Swamiji has these 4 yogas, it's not necessary that we should love all the 4 yogas equally. And we may, if we love Swamiji, we say, oh, these are all Swamiji's words, and of course we'll treasure them. But oftentimes we might find that among these 4 yogas, the way all the 4 yogas, as Swamiji said, singly or in any combination can take us to that same goal. It's not so much we choosing which yoga to practice or which spiritual practice to do. It's really the yoga chooses us rather than we choose the yoga in some way. It's a little bit like if you go to buy, say, shoes in a shop. Is it time?
No worries.
Okay.
3 more minutes. You can go as long as you like.
Okay. I'll try to speed up. Okay.
Tea break and then 6:30.
Okay. So when we go to buy a pair of shoes, for instance, so you go to a shop, then you look and then you say, okay, let me try this, and then you have, say, 6 or 7 pairs the salesperson puts before you, and you try them on, and then finally you make a choice and say, okay, I'm going to buy this pair. Now, superficially, it'll seem as if I made the choice. I had the freedom where all these 6, 7 pairs were placed before me, and I chose this pair. Or maybe not. Maybe I already have certain pre-existing ideas in my mind about, or this color is better, or this style is what suits me, or this is what I would like to do. So I'm already preconditioned to choosing a certain thing. And so when these 6 or 7 pairs are put before me, the choice is already made because of these already pre-existing biases and prejudices I might have against certain color or certain style, or for certain color, certain style. So I really had no freedom. Among those 6 or 7 pairs, I could not have chosen any other pair. And so sometimes it's a mistake to think, it's an illusion to think I make the choice, but really you could say that shoes chose me rather than me choosing the choice. Something like that can happen and does happen, that when we are exposed to different teachings and different practices, we are naturally drawn towards certain practices, certain thing. And that's great, because that's what resonates best with us. And so jnana and bhakti is a little bit like that. So rather than thinking, oh, somehow I need to harmonize both, we don't have to, but eventually they will get harmonized. And regarding that, I just want to add one other thing also. And that is the kind of a dilemma everyone faces, especially in a kind of a collective setting, is this, that Swamiji's 4 yogas I already mentioned, but in our lectures, talks and books, there are things dealing with knowledge, and there are things dealing with bhakti and karma and meditation. There's like a feast of things. Somehow we think that all of these things somehow have to get reconciled in me. Somehow it's my burden to harmonize them all. I don't think that's necessary. My personal feeling is that among all the things that are available, find what resonates with you. It doesn't have to be everything, maybe just 1 or 2 things among them. Then take them seriously. Follow the implications of putting those things into practice. And that itself will solve all the problem. It's not our burden to try to harmonize everything. I think that really will make things easy, because sometimes what happens is that, oh, here Swamiji said like that, and there Thakur has said like this, and then Mother, and then Ramana Maharshi has said something like that, and Aurobindo has said something like that. And now I'm all confused. I'm confused because I think that somehow all of these things have to be harmonized. They don't have to be. Just pick up the teaching that makes sense to you and just hold on to it, and it'll take you. That's the way to make our life less complicated. It's not our burden to harmonize all the spiritual ideas in the world. There are many, and we don't need all of them. It's enough to hold on to one healthy, positive idea, and that can take us to that highest goal. How to distinguish between Shraddha and blind faith? Well, faith, as Swamiji said, you might remember it comes in Swamiji's life, faith is always blind. There is no faith with eyes and faith with this thing. Faith simply means that Shraddha, as I did mention in the morning, is that we don't have any evidence. We are not really seeing it, but deep down, it's almost like what you could say, a gut feeling. We know it's there. And so, in that sense, faith is always blind. But our spiritual journey, our journey begins with faith, deep faith, Shraddha, but it shouldn't end there. We need faith as long as we have not had experience. Once we have had experience, then we don't need faith anymore. So the faith's job is done. But we need faith before we have had any experience. So this question is generated through an example. Someone is suffering from acute illness. This person is in dilemma of getting treatment through Ayurvedic or allopathic. This person started meditating. How it can be definitive if the answer is created by the mind or given by conscience? Oh, I don't think meditation might always help in deciding which kind of treatment one must have. Best is to, my approach would be to consult with trustworthy sources who are familiar with the subject matter and take their advice, and ultimately, with a prayerful, calm mind, choose among the options that are available. Because if I have no medical background, no matter how much I meditate, I'm not going to be able to know whether I should do this or that. That would be my way of thinking. That's how I would do if I were in that situation. In the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna stated, "He who is the Guru is also the Ishta." Can you please elaborate on this and how to look upon our Guru? Sometimes it is said that, not sometimes, actually, that's how it is often said, that it's the Ishta, the divine, comes to us in the form of our Guru. As I mentioned in the beginning, the journey is always from that which is tangible to the intangible. And so the highest reality, being transcendent, seems beyond reach. And therefore we need some tangible supports to go to that ideal which is beyond, as they say, mind and speech and senses, is beyond everything. And therefore, among the tangible things really is, first of all, as we referred to earlier, the personal aspect of the divine. That is, the divine may be beyond form and formlessness, but to try to visualize the divine ascribing a form and a name. It's not something that we can just pull out of our hat, that these forms and names are sacred. They have been around for centuries. And so that's one way of the divine becoming more tangible. It becomes even more tangible than in the form of one's own Guru. It becomes tangible also through the mantra. And of course, if we have the likeness of the Ishta, either in the form of an image or a photograph nowadays and so on. So these are ways that which is transcendent as if comes within our reach. But all of these are supports that we have, and eventually we must learn to walk without the help of these supports. So yes, it is helpful to think about one's own Guru as a more tangible way the Ishta has come to us. But it's important to recognize the Guru has to be merged into the Ishta, not the other way around. And so from that which is more tangible, we go towards that which is less tangible. So as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, you might remember, sometimes some people used to go and say, you are Rama and you are Krishna. And then Sri Ramakrishna often said, no, the wave belongs to the ocean. The ocean doesn't belong to the wave. And so that was his way of saying that all identifications, all merging will occur from the tangible to the less tangible. And we have to be very careful that this way of thinking and praying doesn't get reduced into some form of idol worship. And idolatry is not something that can help. Speaking of idol, I think it's helpful. Sometimes we see, I think the word idol gets used quite often, as if it is a synonymous with murti. But I think it would be good to avoid the word idol, because that word really has a specific theological meaning. And idolatry is condemned in many ways. So try to find an alternative way of referring. I think an image may be better, or a murti if you want, you could just use it. But try to avoid it, because sometimes Those who are familiar with the tradition understand what is being referred to, but those who are not familiar with the tradition will then automatically mistake this idol for what the word means in their own theologies. And so the word idol is, I think, best avoided. Next, does the universe lose intellectual and spiritual potential from losses of human lives experienced in historical periods such as Bengal famine or Holocaust? Does the universe lose intellectual and spiritual potential from losses? I'm not sure whether I've understood the question. I wouldn't think so. There are two ways of looking at things in life. There is the subjective way and the objective way. Objectively, if we see, then there may be many different interpretations of that. But subjectively, it's not so much what's happening outside, but how I react to it, how I understand it, and what I do about it. Swami Vivekananda once wrote to his English disciple, J.J. Goodwin, the one who actually transcribed most of his talks that are in the complete works. And Swamiji says, I think it's such a very profound statement. Swamiji writes, we Vedantists, in every situation, must ask the subjective question, learn to look at things subjectively. And what it means is this: our normal tendency is to look at things objectively. If like something, why is that person doing that way? Why is that thing happening that way? We just like questioning what's happening outside. A subjective way would be, why am I seeing it that way? Looking at things subjectively is more empowering, because I know then if I'm seeing certain things in a certain way, if I just change my way of seeing, I might see something different. So for instance, now if I think someone is a bad person, and then I will react to it very differently. But then I can look within my heart and say, why am I seeing a bad person there? I mean, if I were really seeing reality as it is, and if we truly believe that God is present in all, if we truly believe that divine is present everywhere, I should have been seeing God there. I should have been seeing the divine. So there is something lacking in my own heart, that instead of seeing the divine, I'm really seeing a human being. And instead of seeing merely a human being, I'm seeing a devil there. So it then gives me an opportunity to make some changes within. And it's possible that I make some changes in my own heart. What I begin to see outside may be very different from what I see now. So this is really a conflict between a subjective approach to life and an objective approach to life. So we have only 3 or 4 or 5 questions. I'll try to race through them. Hopefully they're not very tough. When one has experienced loss of opportunities for satsang of kind-hearted and good people, how to think of a practice vairagya? Think of loss of opportunities for satsang. Yes, sometimes these things can occur. There is no point in weeping over things that have passed. As the Buddha said, the past has gone, never to come back. Tomorrow has not yet come. So rather than worrying about tomorrow or feeling guilty or bad about what happened yesterday, if we focus on what I need to do today, we have a better chance of doing the right thing. And so, like the Boston Center, for instance, is right surrounded by the Boston University. And many of our devotees who come now were formerly students in the university. And so I have heard some of them tell me that as students, they passed by our center so often when they were students, but they said at that time, I wish I had come to Vedanta then. Then I could have come 20 years earlier, and now I missed that chance. And I often tell them, no, maybe if you had come to your Vedanta 20 years before as a student, just dropped in to see what's going on in this place, you may not have been able to appreciate it as much as you're doing it now. Maybe we are not ready then. So no point in crying over what has gone by, but making sure that the opportunities that are available to us at present, we don't miss them. When I'm doing japa, my mind is disturbed, but when I read Kathamrita and think about Thakur, I can concentrate very well. Is it the same as doing japa? Well, if I'm able to think of Thakur and concentrate, and if my mind does get focused, then eventually I might become ready to do japa sooner or later, I think. So it's a good sign that if I'm reading the Kathamrita and my mind is concentrated, then eventually, yes. If my Ishta, then if it's the Ramakrishna Kathamrita you read and you feel uplifted, your mind is focused, then if Ramakrishna is your Ishta, then eventually it will be easier for you to concentrate the mind. Next, when one is reborn, is it the same soul that carries over karma from the previous life, or is it a common pool of karma accumulated? No, it's not common pool by all the souls. I have heard it stated both ways. Oh, I had never heard this common pool thing. But my understanding of karma is simply this. Karma, first of all, is always individual. So karma is something, it's kind of entered into common language. People use the term anywhere and everywhere. So a lot of time the word karma gets misused, and that creates a lot of confusion. So people might think about national karma and this karma. There is no national karma. There is no family karma. Karma is always individual. Secondly, death. Death simply means the death of this sthula sharira, the tangible body. Death doesn't even mean death of the mind. Mind and brain are two distinct entities. Brain is a part of the body. The brain is destroyed when the body is destroyed. But the mind is not the brain. And so the mind survives. So the self or the Atman, the Jiva, and the mind survive death. And so if and when the soul is reborn, the same Atman, the same mind, the mind is the repository of all of our karma there. And then it acquires a new body. So it is helpful to remember that in every birth, we get a new body. We don't get a new mind. The mind that you and I have is the mind that has been with us all through our past gazillion lives. And because the mind has been with us for such a long time and is going to remain with us until we realize God, we need to be more careful about how we deal with the mind. The body eventually will go and you will get a new model of the body eventually. I mean, it's like this. What's the point of getting, suppose you have a car and someone says, I can change the body of your car as often as you want, but the engine is never going to change. Then you're going to be very careful to take good care of that engine, because you're not going to get another engine. You might get a different body. And therefore, we have to be very careful with the mind, because we don't get a different mind. So, yes, no pool of karma. It's our own. And then it's not as if our karma is stored in some bank somewhere. All of our karma in all of our past that we have done is right now with us, except that we are allowed to use only that karma which has begun to yield fruit. That's why it's called prarabdha. It's almost like you have a certain amount of bank balance, and the bank says, this year you can use only this much amount from your account, no more money. It's something like that. I'm not saying the bank can do it, or I don't even know whether they can do it. But suppose there is some financial arrangement when you might have a lot of money in your account, but you are given only a fixed amount per year to use. It's a little bit like that. So all of our karma bank is right here with us, but only a certain amount of karma is taken and said, for this life, you have to use up this karma. And therefore, lifespan, how long a person is going to live, depends on how much karma has begun to yield fruit. It does not depend on, now, this is going to contradict a little bit of what I said before, but it doesn't depend on health, it doesn't depend on anything really. Because as I said, apparently healthy people die too. It doesn't depend on age. Young people die also. So what is it that determines how long a person is going to live? From the perspective of the theory of karma, it means only that karma which I'm supposed to use up in this body. Once that karma is exhausted, any excuse will do for the body to drop dead. As long as that karma is not over, this person may fall down from a plane crash and yet might survive. So karma theory is kind of, it's great so long as you understand it. Again, but it's only a theory. Don't try to ever be fanatical about it, because it's only a theory. There is no way to prove or disprove it. Finally, the last question. How can I move on from a mistake I have made and come to terms with it? From live chat. The best way to move on, so to speak, is to admit that if I made a certain mistake, then there will be a certain price to pay. And so long as I'm willing to pay that price, I can move on. Sometimes we are not able to move on because we are not willing to, we somehow want an exemption from the mistakes that we made. Sometimes exemptions are possible, sometimes they are not. Sometimes through God's grace, past mistakes can get effaced. Sometimes some of the things can be removed. There are certain karmas that I mentioned in the book called Prayashchitta karmas, by which certain amount of mistakes can be removed, but not every mistake can be neutralized that way. The best way to move on, I think, psychologically, is to make a firm determination that I will not make the mistakes that I've committed before, and then surrender ourselves fully to the feet of the divine. So thank you very much for these questions. It made me think more than I normally do, and I hope some of these ideas have been helpful to you. And my thanks once again to Gyanananda ji and to all the monastic brothers here for this chance to spend some time with you and share some of these thoughts and learn from your thoughts and ideas as well. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhur.